A Friday evening deadline to an early release of your Game Week 28 complete guide. People are still wondering about who my favorite cheap midfielder is. I haven't confirmed any of my 2 or 3 transfers going into Game Week 28. Should you be selling Timber, Rice, or Enzo from your team? Who are the best players to buy? What should you be doing if you're on Wildcard? Everything you need to know about starting and benching key players this week for Game Week 28. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. The key question of the week that we're going to kick off with is around those cheap midfielders. Almost every single manager that I see making transfers, asking questions in the chat, in the comments, is around which of these cheap midfielders would I recommend you buying. So here, once again, is my updated list of my top 5 best cheap midfielders to consider this week. This doesn't really include the players from 7 million up. So someone like a Rodgers, someone like a Wirtz, if he's available, someone like a Brian and Burmo is in a whole new different category of players. But if you're looking under 7 million, my number one remains Harry Wilson. Although I do have a sneaky suspicion that I think Dango could be a very good differential punt. And if you're actually chasing rank, I think Dango feels like the player who could potentially explode more over the next 4 weeks, but comes with a slight bigger bit of risk about minutes and certainty of starts, whereas Harry Wilson feels slightly more secure and plays 3 of the next 4 at home. So if you're chasing rank, maybe consider going for Dango, who has had 5 big chances in the last 6 game weeks combined, whereas Harry Wilson has had no big chances in the same time. It's just a shame that Dango has scored just 1 of those 5, missing 4 of his 5 big chances in the last 6 game weeks. It sounds like Ekatike for anyone who owns him in their team as well. But those are definitely my top 2, which basically means I don't really see a reason to buy Dominic Szoboszlai. Now, the fixtures afterwards from game week 32 onwards are still quite good for Liverpool. So if you've already played your wild card and you're looking until the end of the season, then maybe someone like Dominic Szoboszlai should start to come into consideration. And that's kind of the same story with Elliot Anderson at Nottingham Forest. As a season-long hold, someone who's going to get DEFCON does start to become more appealing, starts to become more of a focus who you can just play every single week. And even if they're not getting attacking returns, he's still going to pick up 4 or 5 pointers every week like he's done over the past few weeks. He's also said in a press conference on Thursday that he's getting more advanced. He's taking more shots under the new manager, which is something he wants to add to his game. So again, long term, I like Szoboszlai and Anderson, but for the majority of you looking to wildcard in 32, Dango and Harry Wilson are my number 1 and 2. If you need a cheaper option, I would look at Tavernier. I do expect him to come back into the Bournemouth team and start at home to Sunderland. He's on most set pieces. He's on penalties as well. 3 of the next 4 at home. He was a great pick. That's why I bought him before he got injured, and a nice cheap price and a great differential now if you need a cheaper option for the next few weeks. Now, leading on from that conversation and from that question is around expensive midfielder versus expensive defender. And lots of you are wondering about making a couple of transfers, selling a defender and selling a midfielder. And you're sort of proposing options that look something like this. Now, it could be someone else like Dango in place of Harry Wilson. If Florian Wirtz is back available, it could be him over Brian and Burmo. But lots of you are looking at a Virgil van Dijk and Harry Wilson situation versus a Hill and Brian and Burmo situation. And I feel pretty confident that I would pick the combination on the left of Virgil van Dijk or an expensive defender and a cheaper midfielder. That's because simply when I look at the midfielders, I'm not even certain that the more expensive midfielder in the likes of Rodgers and Burmo or Florian Wirtz actually outscore the cheap midfielders, and they're 2+ million more expensive than them. So if I don't think there's a points difference to be gained, even if they were at the same price, yes, if they were both the same price, I probably would pick Brian and Burmo, but I don't think there's 2 million value between them. However, I do think Virgil van Dijk is worth paying the money over someone like a Hill. And on top of that, you can't play Hill every single week. There are some games between now and game week 31 that you would need to bench him or rotate him with someone else in your defense. So I do think that Virgil van Dijk and a cheap midfielder or something like that is better for your team and your structure than Hill and Mbeumo. There will be some of you who can afford all 4 of these in your team if your squad structure allows it. But generally, if you're faced with this, I prefer the expensive defender, cheap midfielder option to the others. Now, with the double for Arsenal out of the way and the nice run of fixtures for Chelsea out of the way, lots of you are considering, do I sell Enzo Fernandez or Declan Rice? And do I sell Declan Rice or Jurriën Timber? And a big question is around the priority of selling these. for me, people are underestimating Declan Rice over the next 3 weeks. Chelsea at home, Brighton away, Everton at home are three really good fixtures for Arsenal. I know that Declan Rice hasn't been as explosive. He's not been scoring that many goals, but actually not that many midfielders in the game have. I do think the replacements for Declan Rice also look quite good, which is what causes that debate in a lot of people's mind, that selling Declan Rice to Harry Wilson or to Dan Guattara feels like the exciting transfer that you should make. So to start off, between Enzo Fernandez and Declan Rice, which one of those would I prioritize selling? I actually think if you're having to start one, I would sell Enzo first, because Declan Rice is a good pick for the next 3 weeks. But if Enzo Fernandez will stay in your team and be useful for you in the blank in game week 31, then you can sell Declan Rice. I think Declan Rice will outscore Enzo for the next three, but it's an extra transfer for game week 31 because, of course, Rice blanks and Enzo Fernandez doesn't. If it's between Declan Rice and Timber, again, I would probably prioritize selling Declan Rice. I still think the Arsenal defense is good. I don't see many other defenders, despite the fact that O'Reilly and Virgil van Dijk have massively hauled over the past couple of weeks. I don't see many defenders with that much upside, with that great clean sheet potential over the next few weeks, despite what Virgil van Dijk owners and O'Reilly owners might have got recently. I think the upside of chasing a Rice replacement is probably better, and it's likely to free up some money to allow you to do something else in your team. Now, one of the key players last week to look to buy was Florian Wirtz, and I'm getting questions around, is there an update on him? Is he going to be back available for West Ham at home? So at time of recording, we don't really have an update. The majority of press conferences for basically every team in the league will be taking place on Friday after this video is recorded and after it's published before the deadline. So we will discuss all of that in detail on the deadline stream on Friday evening. Of course, a Friday evening deadline between Wolves and Aston Villa on the Friday evening match. What we've got at the moment on Florian Wirtz. So after the game week 27 fixture, the update was pretty positive that he was just a slight back strain. He was expected to be back for West Ham at home, which came a week later. However, at time of recording on Thursday, we've had lots of videos, photos from Liverpool training taking place, and Wirtz has not been in any of them as of yet. The other thing to remember as well is game week 29 is a midweek round of Premier League. So the turnaround for West Ham at home to Wolves away is very quick. So even if there is a chance that Wirtz is going to be back for West Ham at home, if he's not fully ready, they've also got to think about a quick turnaround to Wolves away in game week 29. So unless we get a really glowing recommendation, a really positive update on Wirtz in the press conference that says, yup, he's been training, he's ready to go, he's absolutely fine, then you can consider buying him. But if he says he's touch and go, we'll see how he evolves, I probably wouldn't risk it because there's too quick a turnaround, which means he could miss one of the two games. Away from the key questions this week, having a look at captaincy, and I actually think the Leeds away is not a great fixture for Haaland. Leeds have been very good at home, and anyone who captained or triple captained Erling Haaland against Leeds earlier on in the season will know just how much he struggled to get any returns in that game. He came away with just a 2-pointer. However, I do think he is still the safest pick because I don't love any of the other players in terms of performances and in terms of consistency. Second up, we've gone with Bruno Fernandes, who's actually predicted to be the highest scoring player on the Fantasy Football Scout members area. Third is Thiago. Again, a great fixture away at Burnley, putting him in my top three. Outside of that, we've got Ekitike, who plays for Liverpool, predicted to score the most goals of any team in game week 28. And finally is Bryan Mbeumo, who I actually think is a good differential over Bruno Fernandes. I only think Bruno is a better pick than Mbeumo because he's on penalties. And if you don't think, or let's say Man United don't get a penalty against Crystal Palace, I actually think Bruno would probably drop below Bryan Mbeumo. But just that safety net of potentially having pens does put Bruno back into the top three. Haaland, Bruno and Thiago are all on them. I do think it is an okay week to think about going against Haaland because they're predicted to score less than 2 goals this week. Only just, but that doesn't happen very often for Manchester City. As a chance of a goal scorer or an assister, Haaland is top, just over Bruno Fernandes. Second, Ekitike is quite high up there. If Ekitike had scored some of his big chances over the past few weeks, there would be a bigger conversation to have here. I do think Haaland is one. I do think Bruno and Thiago are worth considering over him if you're looking for a differential, because Haaland, as you can see, is definitely the most captain, and he's my current captain as well. Looking at best players to buy for game week 28, starting off with a reduced list of goalkeepers, because outside of the top 5, I don't think there's any goalkeepers I'd really be looking to use a transfer on. Number 1 is Kelleher. Despite the 2-0 loss and the clean sheet wipeout for anyone who bought him last week. I still think over the next 4, I back them highly, and at his price, he's a nice option. Next up is Petrovic. Again, the short-term fixtures for Bournemouth look very good. A clean sheet away at West Ham in game week 27. Sunderland at home this week is a nice entry point with the way that Sunderland are performing, particularly away from home at the moment. If you've got the money and you can't get to a Virgil van Dijk or a Konate, you could look at Alisson in goal. He's not bad for saves. He gets the odd bonus point, but I would prefer one of the Liverpool defenders over him. And if you don't want to spend the money, just go into the rotating pair of Darlow and Dubravka. Darlow and Leeds from game week 29 have a really nice set of fixtures for 3 weeks before potentially wildcarding in game week 32, and you can play Dubravka at home to Brentford this week. So those 2 cheap options, you could definitely do worse than backing them. Into defense, first of all, is Virgil van Dijk, the number 1 transferred in defender alongside O'Reilly. For me, he's just the safest. The next 4 fixtures are good. The attacking threat we know is there, and he's finally capitalizing on it. The fixtures and the clean sheet odds are definitely there. Don't get over sort of enthusiastic about it though. They were very lucky to keep a clean sheet against Nottingham Forest, and I'm not certain there's more than 2 clean sheets in the next 4. He's got attacking returns in the past couple of games. Is that going to continue at the rate that it is? Maybe not, but I'm not sure I'd want to back against it with the fixtures they've got. Hill is next up as a nice cheap option at home to Sunderland, and then it is O'Reilly. O'Reilly is really, can you take the risk that he doesn't have a fixture in game week 31 and what it means for your team? If it doesn't impact the amount of players that you can put out in game week 31 and you're willing to sacrifice the additional transfer it might cost to take it, we are expecting that he plays in midfield for Manchester City for the foreseeable future, with it working so well for him in particular. However, it also needs to be noted that on Friday there will be a Champions League draw. And this not only goes for the likes of O'Reilly, but it goes for any potentially rotation-prone Manchester City player like Semenyo in midfield as well. If they get a difficult draw, and not only get a difficult draw, but get drawn so that they play Wednesday before game week 30, they then play West Ham on the Saturday, and then Tuesday in the Champions League, that Wednesday-Tuesday turnaround with a West Ham fixture in the middle will be a rotation nightmare, and you will worry about all of your Manchester City players. If they get rotated in game week 30, potentially, and you have that risk, and then they blank in game week 31, it does come with a risk. But O'Reilly is the most high upside defender you can buy for the next 3 weeks. Next up is Anderson, a nice cheap option. The next 4 fixtures, if you have to play a defender every single week, I really like Anderson at 4.6. If you don't have money for Virgil van Dijk, you can look at Konate. Malik Chow, also worth considering, with a good fixture at home to Everton and then a good fixture at home to Sunderland in the blank. And the final one is a year of Brentford. Collins put in an awful performance off the bench, back healing it to Welbeck as soon as he came on the pitch for them to go 2-0 up. So I don't think he comes back in. So a year at 4.4 could be worth it for the short-term fixtures. Into midfield, Bruno Fernandes is top at home to Crystal Palace. Despite being poor recently in terms of FPL returns, I still think he is a great midfielder for the next 4. Next up is Florian Wirtz, but we need, as I said, a big positive update on him being available in order for him to be a buy this week. If not, you can consider Brian and Burma at home to Crystal Palace if you've got the money. If not, the cheaper ones that we discussed earlier on in the video, Wilson is first, then it's Danguatara, then it's Tavernier, then it's Szoboszlai. If you want to hear my discussion about why they're in this order, make sure you check out the beginning of this video where we discuss that in more detail. And finally up front, Haaland, Thiago, Ekitike for me is my favourite front 3 in the game at the moment. If you need alternatives, Raul Jimenez, Calvert-Lewin, João Pedro, or Krupi Jr. if you need a cheap options are the ones I'd consider. Jimenez comes with a risk with a quick turnaround with West Ham at home midweek. Of course, with Muniz being back for Fulham, it comes with a bit of a risk. You could go to Calvert-Lewin. Their fixtures from 29 look pretty good, but he does play Manchester City this week. He could well do something, though. He is on pretty good form and plays well at home. João Pedro, if you haven't bought him now, it's probably too late, but I still think he is one of the top forwards to own for the next few weeks because after Arsenal, the Chelsea fixtures are not too bad. Then we have a look at benching ranking. Starting off in goal, it is David Raya. The clean sheet projections this week are actually quite low. It's quite difficult to predict who is going to do the best this week. So David Raya is top. Then it is Lamens, Kelleher, Alisson, Donnarumma, Pope, Petrovic. You've got Martinez in there. You've got Verbruggen, Leno, and Dubravka. So if you've got the Kelleher and Verbruggen combination, I would be going with Kelleher. I would be going with both of these over Dubravka, Ortega, and Nottingham Forest. Then it's Sarr, Vicario, Rose, Pickford, Sanchez against Arsenal, Darlow, Henderson, and Hermanson of West Ham. In terms of the attackers, if you've got lots of these big attackers, I've included a lot of them in the benching rankings just because some of you are commenting, I've got 8 great attackers. Which of them would I be benching this week? So if you've got Florian Wirtz, even though he's a doubt, let's wait for the Liverpool press conference on Friday morning to decide whether he's going to play or not. But I would probably start him if he's still a doubt. Then you've got O'Reilly. If you've got him, I would definitely start him for his attacking threat away at Leeds. Danguatara, Wilson, Ryan, Tavernier, Palmer. If you've got, I would still start him despite it being away to Arsenal, although I'd probably be looking to sell him if you've got him. Anderson of Nottingham Forest with a little bit more attacking threat. Then it's Rodgers, Szoboszlai, Virgil van Dijk, Evan Nilsson, Declan Rice, Kripke Jr., Cunha, who to be honest is probably a sell if you own him, but he's quite high up with a fixture at home to Crystal Palace, who of course play on Thursday evening. Malik Chow, Lewis Hall, Iliman Ndiaye away at Newcastle, Senesi and Hill, Bowen, Enzo Lafille, Maguire. Then it is João Pedro over Dewsbury Hall and James Garner. Stack, another cheap option, and Enzo Fernandez is quite low down. A lot of you are able to bench him this week. I wouldn't want to be playing Enzo away at Arsenal. Then it's Mark Guehi, of course, much lower down than O'Reilly because of his lack of attacking threat. Anderson of Fulham, then it's Munoz, then it's Matty Cash, Alderete, Tarkowski, Van de Ven, Chalobah, Esteve, Rodon, Goodmanson, and Richards right at the bottom, playing on Thursday away at Man United this weekend. Lacroix does sound like he'll be back available, being in the squad for Crystal Palace on Thursday evening, so that is a boost to them, but I still don't think I'd want to start any Palace defenders if you don't have to. A quick rundown of chip strategy that we've discussed so far this week in a couple of videos, and just a little bit of a correction. Manchester City and Crystal Palace is a 70% chance of a blank in game week 31. Of course, that is if Manchester City lose to Newcastle in the FA Cup after game week 29. That fixture between Manchester City and Crystal Palace could go into the FA Cup weekend after the game week 31 deadline, but before game week 32, meaning that Crystal Palace and Manchester City are not guaranteed to blank in game week 31. Game week 33, game week 34, the big double in 33, the big blank in game week 34. Save your free hit for one of these 2 weeks. Game week 36, potentially a small double, and game week 37, a potential small blank. That is what the roadmap is likely to look like. But just to cover off a couple of things. On Friday, we'll have the Champions League draw, which might give us a bit of an indication for rotation in and around game week 30. That also goes for the Europa League and the Conference League as well. Between game week 29 and game week 30, we will have that round of the FA Cup, which involves that Newcastle versus Manchester City fixture. Don't make early transfers for game week 30 until at least after the FA Cup weekend. And if you don't have to make a transfer for game week 29, the midweek round, if you can save it to at least wait to see what happens to Manchester City, that potential rearrangement after the FA Cup, I probably would. Because if Manchester City lose to Newcastle and suddenly they play Crystal Palace in game week 31, Semenyo, O'Reilly, others like Donnarumma will suddenly be some of the best players you can consider buying. So if you can roll in 29 and wait on early transfers for game week 30 until after the FA Cup, that is the best possible strategy. Now, as I said, if you can save the free hit until later on in the season, I probably would until game week 33 or game week 34. It is much more valuable then. But if you do want to play it this week, Petrovic in goal alongside O'Reilly, Malik Chow, Van Dijk. We've got Schade, Dango and Bruno in midfield. If Wirtz is available, you can go with him at home to West Ham. If not, someone like Brian Mbeumo, someone like Harry Wilson on the bench, someone like Szoboszlai in this position. Thiago, Ekitike, Haaland up front with cheap options like Wilson, who can sub in. If you don't have the value for it, just downgrade him to someone like an Anderson, to someone like a Tavernier, Hill and Worrell on the bench to sub in if anything was to happen, but you've got pretty nailed starters in your 11. And then having a look at the wildcard draft, things have remained pretty similar. Kelleher in goal, Gabriel, O'Reilly, Virgil van Dijk with Anderson and Hill on the bench. You've got 3 players in this team with a blank in game week 31 with O'Reilly, Gabriel and Erling Haaland. So you don't need to use any transfers to take out players with a blank in game week 31. Of course, Saar doesn't have a fixture on your bench. He's a better cheap goalkeeper than Dubravka. Into midfield, you've gone with a few of the cheap options. Elliot Anderson to carry you through to the end of the season with nice DEFCON, reliable points that you don't really have to use a transfer on. Wilson, Danguatara for short-term appeal for upside with the fixtures. Then it's Wirtz or Brian Mbeumo. If you don't have the value and you want to go for someone like a Dominic Szoboszlai or even a Morgan Rogers in this position, you can. If Wirtz is confirmed categorically available, then maybe you go with him. If not, I quite like the Man United double up. Of course, they don't have any Europe, which is a boost to them. Bruno Fernandes, Thiago, Ekitike, Haaland up front. Again, if you want to go for someone like a Calvert-Lewin or João Pedro over one of these, you can. But I think this is roughly what I would go with on a wildcard to set you up for the long term. And finally, just wrapping up by having a look at my team for game week 28. So At the moment, the captaincy armband remains on Erling Haaland away at Leeds, but I don't think it's a great fixture. Leeds, particularly at home this season, have been very difficult to beat, and Haaland actually blanked against Leeds earlier on in the season. They do quite well with their back five, which we expect from them again, to make it quite difficult for strikers, particularly Haaland. He will be focused on by a lot of those defenders. It might bode well for someone like a Semenyo if you own him. My difficulty is finding an alternative. Ekitike is not on penalties and he's been missing chances. And if Wirtz is out, I do think the Liverpool attack looks worse without him in it, which isn't great for Ekitike. Thiago is away at Burnley, and although Burnley have not been great, defensively they've not been great. Their XGC this season is bottom in the league. He has been missing chances, and I've just not been that impressed by Brentford as a team. Of course, they conceded twice and didn't score a single goal against Brighton last weekend, and that leaves the Man United options. But I do have a double up, so that does put me off putting the captaincy armband there once again. Now, Crystal Palace do play on Thursday night, so let's see how they get on with that. They might be a bit fatigued going into this game against Man United, who are fully rested from their game on Monday night. But again, Mbeumo got subbed off slightly early. Bruno hasn't done anything to really impress me over the last couple of matches. So at the moment, Haaland captain, Bruno vice captain is the way that it is stayed, and it has been all week as well. In terms of those transfers, I've pretty much ruled out buying Florian Wirtz. He feels like too much of a doubt. I don't think we're going to get enough confirmation that he's definitely back fully fit to be able to start not only West Ham, but then again away at Wolves a few days later, which means that Virgil van Dijk in for Dorgu is almost certain to be one of the two transfers that I make this week. It's then just which midfielder I buy in place of Declan Rice. And I actually don't think that Declan Rice is a definite sell this week at home to Chelsea, because after that, he has Brighton away and Everton at home. I actually think that Rice could do quite well over the next couple of games, but I do think that freeing up the money from him in order to buy Van Dijk is the best way for me to do it. It's just Wilson versus Dango. I would say I'm 75% chance that I buy Wilson and 25% chance that it's Dango. But Dango having 5 big chances in the last 6, although he's missed 4 of those 5 big chances, Wilson hasn't had a single big chance, which is just making me wonder about Dango being a good differential and being a very explosive option. I don't think any of us will deny that Dango feels the more explosive, the higher upside pick, whereas Wilson feels slightly safer. Now, me as a manager, I will always pick the safer route, and buying Virgil van Dijk and Harry Wilson this week are probably the most obvious safe transfers that I can make, and maybe that's what I should be doing. But there is part of me that looks at Dango as an explosive option that I could go to as a differential on top of Wilson. With Burnley this week, it's pretty hard to ignore, but Wilson and Virgil van Dijk is just the most likely. And that is all for your Game Week 28 complete guide. A reminder again that it is a Friday evening deadline. So later today, we'll be back on YouTube with a 2-hour deadline stream in the build up to Game Week 28. If you haven't had any of your questions answered in the Game Week preview, the transfer targets videos, the team selection, and the complete guide, make sure you've gone and checked out all of those videos that I recorded this week. If it's still not answered your question, drop it in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to answer as many of those as I can during Friday. If not, bring them to the deadline stream on Friday evening, where we will answer as many of them in the chat, make my transfers, as there's nothing on Thursday night to force me to go early. There's no price changes, so I'll be making my transfers on that stream, answering your questions. Anyway, that is all. Thank you all for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe if you are new, and I'll be back again very soon.